Hello friends, and welcome to another episode of Into the Shadows, a show where all I do is stories of the scary, the strange, and the supernatural. Normally, the things that scare us are external, and it's easy enough to lock the doors and feel safe. But what if the monster was inside of you? And by the time you even knew it, it was already too late. It had been growing inside you and had now intertwined its body through yours. Make sure you're not drinking from anything other than bottled or boiled water if you want to make it to the end of this story. Katie felt fantastic. She had just graduated and was celebrating in the best way she could think of, with a vacation. An all-inclusive destination vacation with lots of outings and adventures. A trip to relax and see a whole side of the world she had never been. She was a nature buff and had decided to go to Africa. The vast continent was filled with a huge variety of animals, from elephants to lions to giraffes, and Katie was excited to see as many as she could. She considered it a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and was well aware that if she ever was able to come back, there would likely be a number of species gone, pushed to extinction by humans. Little did she know that by the third day of her trip, she would have larvae inside of her. Larvae from a worm that humans have been working hard to eradicate. A creature called the Guinea Worm. It had been almost a year since her trip to Africa, and Katie had been loving life. She had landed a great job, and being young and athletic, was loving the warm weather to show some skin and catch a tan. It was only recently that she had started to feel unwell. Her stomach had been off, with bouts of nausea and diarrhea. And then last week things had gotten much worse, with a fever and an intense itching on her legs and feet. They now seemed swollen as well, and Katie decided it was time to see her doctor. Unfortunately, her family doctor was away until the end of the week, and as a last resort, she went to a hospital. The doctors there were very nice, but they had no idea what was causing her problems. They did know something was very wrong with her though, and gave her medications to ease her fever and swelling. Due to her worrisome symptoms, the doctors decided she needed to stay at the hospital. They took blood work and ran a number of tests on her, but even though she had many visible symptoms, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. After being in the hospital a few days, her fever had only gone down a small bit, and the pain had gotten much worse. So much worse that though the hospital had given her strong painkillers, she was unable to move around much. The joints in her legs were inflamed, constantly driving a dull ache into her mind, even past the fog of morphine. And the itching in her legs was always there, driving her crazy. It felt like her skin was burning, and she could never scratch the itch. It just tortured her endlessly. And now blisters had started to appear on her feet and calves, small little bumps that were extremely painful and ugly. The days dragged on, seeming to be endless rounds of nurses bringing pills and IV bags, and doctors bringing no solutions for what could be going on with her. The days felt surreal. They blended together in a series of drugged up and painful waking hours, separated by sporadic and short-lived naps when her body could no longer stay awake. Even sleep gave her no rest, her dreams feverish and full of nightmares. She wished to fall asleep and wake up when this was all over, but anytime she was finally able to sleep, it would only be a couple hours before she was awake again to her living nightmare. By the time her own doctor arrived back in town, Katie could not remember what it was like to not feel pain. He was shocked at her condition. This previously young, healthy girl, now bedridden and writhing in pain whenever her medications would wear off. He went to see the doctors at the hospital who had been treating her, and they gave him all the information they had been able to gather. He was as stumped as the other doctors, and was racking his brain trying to figure out what was making Katie sick. It was only when he remembered that she had came to him for vaccinations before her trip to Africa that he began to get an idea of what it could be. With a growing concern, he realized she might have contracted something that there was no vaccine against. He rushed to Katie's room with a nurse, and they carefully lowered one of Katie's legs into a bucket of water. After a little while, to everyone's horror, worms broke through the blisters that were under the water, stretching out and waving back and forth. Katie instantly became distraught and began screaming and panicking, overcome with emotions from the idea of these worms inside of her legs. They tried to calm her down, telling her they would get them out, that she would be okay, but she was inconsolable. They eventually had to give the distraught girl a sedative, and for the first time in a long time, Katie faded off into a sleep that pain and fevers couldn't wake her up from. When she awoke from her sleep, she was awake but still sedated and much calmer. The doctors broke it to her that they had good and bad news for Katie. They had figured out what was going on with her. She had contracted a parasite while she had been overseas on vacation. The creatures inside of her and coming through her skin were the guinea worms, the final form of the parasite. Over a year ago, she had ingested the larva from some form of water, either drinking it somehow from contaminated and untreated water, or perhaps accidentally ingesting it while adventuring across the African continent. She learned with horror that the creatures had bred and survived inside her. They had become very long worms, growing from 60 centimeters to a meter in length, tunneling through her flesh and becoming intertwined with her. They were breaking through her skin now because they were fully grown females, trying to release their own larvae, looking to spread themselves to other hosts. The reason that the water in the bucket had coaxed the worms out was because the larva needed the water to spread, and the worms knew to break through the skin when it had entered water. The news only got worse from there, as the worms could not be removed by medication. These parasites were resistant to all known forms of antibiotics and drugs. They also couldn't be removed by surgery because of the way they had tunneled so many paths through her body. The only way to remove them from her was to slowly pull the worms out over the course of several days or weeks, depending on the size of the worm. They would have to do this by keeping her at the hospital and luring the worms out of her by putting the limbs in water. When the worms broke through the skin enough, they would wrap the worms around a stick, smaller, little bigger than a toothpick, preventing it from going back inside her. They would repeat this over and over for weeks, slowly twisting the worms on the sticks hanging from her legs and feet until all the worms were finally removed. They would have to be extremely careful doing this, because if they snapped off or killed a worm before it was removed from her, it would rot inside of her. That would almost guarantee a massive infection that could kill her, and even if she survived, it would likely damage her joints, leaving her disabled for life. Even if they removed all the worms completely, there was still a 50% chance of gangrene and septic from the internal wounds, and the associated risk of joint damage. The next couple of weeks were hell for Katie. Though on many painkillers and medications, she still felt the pain from her swollen legs and joints. That ache and the itching never seemed to let up. The pain was one thing, the worms on sticks dangling from her skin were another. The worms revolted her, and she was never able to not think about them. Her days revolved around doctors checking up on her and nurses periodically coming in to soak her legs and slowly pull the worms out of her, inch by inch. Again and again, the worms were twisted around the sticks until they finally started to pop out of her feet and legs, leaving a deep hole that the doctors sanitized and tried to clean up as best they could. It was many weeks after that before she was able to leave the hospital, but Katie was one of the lucky ones. She was able to leave the worms and their debilitating pain behind her. Under the careful watch of the hospital, she was able to fight off the infections that arose from the worms ravaging her body. But her mind will never be free from the worms, and the trauma and torture that came from just drinking some bad water. And that's the story for today. Super creepy stuff, but I hope you guys liked it. Have you heard of the guinea worm? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you were able to make it this far into the video, then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. I've got new content weekly, and you don't want to miss the next Nightmare Fuel episode. See you guys soon on the next one, and stay spooky, friends.